Good evening, everyone. My name's Josh Gilliland. I'm one of the founding attorneys of the Legal Geeks. With me tonight is Nari Ely, and we are going to boldly travel into the lower decks to talk about We Will Always Have Tom Paris. Nari, how are you?
I am doing fantastic. This show continues to impress me. I really enjoyed the last night's episode.
It was super fun, and also for again getting to play with Tom Paris was also pretty hysterical. But yeah, it's a love letter to everything good and pure about Trek, and with lots of little callbacks
Oh,
and rich in legal issues.
definitely. This was a bit of an issue spotter.
Because we had, the mismatched team of the female characters haven't gone out on an adventure together. It's either been all four, or they're paired off with Rutherford and Tendi and Mariner and Boimler, or like they're all together. So this what broke the norm of let's the boys are going on separate adventures and the girls go out on a girls trip. So let's jump into the issue of what kicks us off. Sending a direct report, Tendi, off on the doctor's personal errand, with the issue of whether or not that's approved or not. And there are lots of military cases that we can talk about with the issues here of what's going on with sending Tendi out on a personal errand at the doctor's orders. And let's get into that. So you took an issue right out of the United States Military Code of Justice, and hit it for me, please.
Yes, so it will surprise no one, I hope, that a superior officer ordering an inferior to do something that is, first of all, just is not official business, period, but secondly is arguably of personal gain, is a big no-no. So while that would certainly fall under any number of catch-alls, there's a long list of, if anyone ever actually looks at the text of Article 134, they'll probably get a kick out of it, because there's a long list of sometimes hilariously specific offenses that are listed in 134 after it lays out the court-martial procedure. And one of them I think hits this one on the head, which is graft. It's also a nice old-timey term. This is one of the reasons why it's actually kind of funny to peruse Article 134, is a lot of these offenses seem a little outdated, but it's referred to as graft. Essentially, I would argue under the pretense of a mission, that it's an official mission, ordering an inferior officer to do something that personally benefits you could be considered to be graft. Now, I think undoubtedly this is a service of value, right? If you would have to hire someone to do this kind of courier service, especially at the speed at which she's asking for it, which is go get it right now. I want it by tomorrow, or whatever the timeline was, very compressed timeline. So it's undoubtedly of value. Now, of course, the question is was it a pretense? If it's not, if it's not a pretense that it's a mission and it's an actual mission, then that's not an issue. But it is being held out as an official duty. I just don't see how this is an official duty. Even if it's not captured by 134, as I was saying, there's a lot of catch-alls for conduct unbecoming and such like that. So you would probably still be able to get their chief medical officer for something, because this just ain't right, Josh.
I actually disagree. And let's talk about the comparison to a muck time. So the doctor's species, like Vulcans, goes into a not a 7-year itch for mating season, but apparently an annual one, or something that's a little
12 months, yep.
Yeah. So she needs the crate. In order for that medical condition to be treated.
Although supposedly she needed the pole. But...
Yeah, let's talk about. We don't need to get into the giant specifics yet, but let's focus on the issues here. And so that could be a protected condition, that it's kind of in that disability stage that a reasonable accommodation needs to be made, and sending someone out to go get the scratching post
Mhm.
is one way that seems reasonable. When you compare it to a muck time, Kirk diverts the Enterprise, going like, I know what I need to be doing, but Spock's going insane. He slapped Nurse Chapel across the face. There's a lot. He doesn't normally do that, so something's wrong here, and it's going to drive him mad and could lead to serious health implications if he's not treated. So, necessity defense, they take the Enterprise and they swing through Vulcan so uh, they can have a muck time. Compared to this, sending out, I need you to do this. Because we've seen Pon farr come up in Voyager with the Doctor figuring out holographic treatments for Tuvok. There's probably other Vulcans that fell into that category as well. So this is, it's a medical necessity that needs to be taken care of here because the Doctor's in physical distress. Might not be life threatening, but she is going crazy from.
Well, crazier at least.
Yeah, again, she's kind of that alley cat that likes to get into fights. So that said, I think this is justifiable, which brings me to my analysis of they're going out in a shuttlecraft. So is this a personal errand or not? And is sending Tendi off in a shuttlecraft like someone going to the MWR facility on a military base, which stands for Morale, Welfare, and Recreation, and like checking out a boat? And like the Marine Corps base on Okinawa has seagoing kayaks that service members and their families can check out. So is checking out a shuttlecraft to go get the scratching post comparable to that sort of mission? That this is a now like PTO basically, and or is it again? So if it's the analysis of it's
Paid
PTO,
time off, by the way, for anybody who doesn't know.
exactly. So it's a vacation for Tendi, and she's taking the shuttlecraft to go do a personal errand, which puts it into one specific category of like that seems doable. That if the shuttlecraft can be used for that sort of transit, or if this is official business because of a medical necessity that needs to be acquired, it's a reasonable thing to go do to keep the Doctor from going crazy. That also seems fair. On the flip side, couldn't that have been made in the holodeck?
So yeah, the other thing is that it's a little weird to have her, as you pointed out right at the top of this, her direct report doing it for her, especially because her direct report is a medic. she's a doctor. You would think that you would be able to have, Starfleet like put in an official request to have this supplied to you. Starfleet would arrange for someone of the appropriate skill set with the appropriate availability, as opposed to her direct report. Just because of that, I do think that if this were like the DoD or the U.S. military, that would probably raise some flags. But I ultimately at the end of the day, I think that this would probably be overlooked.
Yeah, it's like Picard wanting to have his bionic heart repaired and taking a shuttle to another planet, and so that way to have it done and for his crew not to know about it. The Doctor might have a similar feeling of, I don't want this broadcast, that I need this or else I'm going to claw somebody's eyes out. Probably could create some weird friction in the ship.
Which would probably be better to have Starfleet handle it, because then someone who doesn't know her at all would just be told, you need to go get a box.
Yeah,
Just a Starfleet delivery.
just go pick this up and no questions asked. Yes, ma'am, we're on it. We will never discuss this again. So, and there they go. Now, the planet that we do see in Picard, that's where Seven of Nine meets up with them. So, like, that was a cute little call out as being, Quark's 2.0. So,
special place.
yes. Which raises the question: did Quark franchise So did he leave DS9 or is he just have a new
Wait, did I
bar?
miss, does it actually say Quarks 2.0? Did I miss that?
It says Quarks.
Oh
So
my god.
is
He
this a
must have
franchise
franchised
like
or
McDonald's?
expanded. Oh, that's good for a Quark.
Yeah, because did he leave DS9? And I I don't know if any of the books address that, but I'd be surprised
Mm,
if he had no rent on the station. Like, why would he have
yeah.
left? And like, if he's profitable, I get franchising though.
Yeah, so, or expanding. Yeah, yeah. I think I like to think that he was just a success, and now Quarks, the name is famous. So
It's he's like McDonald's, like that. The clown is universal, and that could be the same with the Ferengi. That he makes a holographic version of himself that appears, and he's
oh
his
my
own
god.
mascot.
As long as the holograph is voluntarily created.
Doesn't
That was a
develop
great episode. Anyway.
details. So let's talk about you identified an agency issue with
Yes.
our girls going out on their girls trip.
Yes. So this is for any law professors watching who want to come up with a fun exercise for their class. This episode might serve as a good jumping off point because you can go through sort of the timeline of this mission, and we're just going to assume that it is in fact a mission, and look at whether or not Starfleet would be potentially liable for any damage that's caused, sorry, any torts that are committed by their officers as they're going about this girls trip, this escapade. Now, so generally speaking, there's a fancy Latin term in law called respondeat superior, which is referring to what I'm just talking about. It's attempting to hold an employer liable for the torts, injuries, things like damage, property damage, things like that, but conducted by their employees. And there are certain conditions for that to be true. The first is that an employer can be held liable under respondeat superior for the negligent acts of their employee. So this would not be an intentional tort. So if your employee walks out of in your store, a customer walks in, says something rude, and the employee punches them. That is an intentional tort, usually not covered. We just don't assume that by default to be. This is the other key element within the scope of employment. So that would be something that within sort of the foreseeable course of your employees' employment, something they might do. So this would be, it's kind of interesting because in that respect, a security guard, for example, punching someone that would kind of be within the general scope of their employment. So even though we ordinarily consider punching someone to be an intentional tort, it might fall within that. Here's a question, Josh. Since these are Starfleet officers, and Starfleet officers frequently employ force as quasi-law keepers in various places, would the girls getting into a fight in the bar qualify as within the ordinary scope of their employment? So I think they might have left right before blows actually got thrown with the Nausicaans, but when they do like toss over the table with the latinum on it and maybe do some property damage, would any of that be generally considered within the scope of their employment, do you think?
No, because unless the scope of the employment includes, sometimes you're going to have to get into games of chance to raise money to pay for something, then you would have a plausible argument. But this is like the truck driver who has to go from Sacramento to Reno and then decides to stop in South Lake Tahoe, going off Highway 80 to go gambling for a little bit. Like, that's not within the scope of your employment. You've now gone on a frolic, and that's not part of your job
Also, frolic is an actual legal term, I think, so that's awesome.
yeah.
Just for other people may not be aware of that, it is a real legal term.
Flashing back to Professor Gevertz and first year torts. But yeah, so like they go on a frolic, that's not part of the scope of their employment. And it's one thing to go like, oh, we got to get this fixed. That's a plausible argument that they had to go get it fixed. And if I was defending them, I would really lean into that one, because in this, like, we don't use money And like, so what do you do when somebody wants latinum strips in order for payment? If the manual says go play domjong, and in order to raise the money, then okay, go be the pool shark. But I don't think the manual says that. But if you have a captain like Janeway or Kirk, you're probably going to be okay.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great example, Josh. I totally agree. This seems way outside of their normal scope of employment. I do think that this in particular is a fun episode, though, to try to look at the agency question, because you have a number of episodes involving off-duty Starfleet officers who are still in their uniform, at bars, getting into fights, that kind of thing. But this one is the closest where they keep telling themselves, we are on a mission. And I agree with you, the actual circumstances here belie that, right? So it's not just does the person think they're acting for their employer. It's also not does the employer control their actions. The question is, yeah, is it within the scope of their employment? And they've clearly gone on a frolic here, both in the legal sense and in the literal sense. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
It's there are plenty of stories about sailors on shore leave, having adventures. Plenty of movies about that, and Picard getting stabbed through his heart falls into that category as well of bar fight. Like,
I assume that was a direct callback with the Nausicaa.
oh, it has to be
Yeah.
absolutely, no doubt about it, down to the fight, because Picard at least stood his ground and then got stabbed through the back. However, they just cut and run. So, which is again better, smarter situation to go like, we're not going to get through this. So, but it definitely great callback, and again, just great reverence for the source material and going, what can we pull from here?
And just to then cap off this topic with sort of the timeline of their escapade, then they turn even more desperately to a pirate haven in order to do it. Now, assume for the moment that the pirates could or would actually try to sue for the various. There was definitely some property damage and some blows thrown there at the pirate haven. Just assume for the moment they would actually show up in a civil court and sue for it, and that a court would entertain it. I think if the first one is a frolic, this has got to be a frolic.
It's a frolic, and you have to say we had to go undercover. And what sets off the Orions is false green.
I'm just gonna say it is the green face. She was going in green face.
And there's so much to weigh into there. I can't.
That was hilarious.
It was.
It was like such a great way to deal with it too, with Beckett saying, "This makes me feel really uncomfortable. Just please don't take any pictures of me during our mission." That was some class A comedy there.
Yeah, it's like you don't want to run for governor of Virginia, so yeah, just small things that could come back to haunt you.
And just like there's been a number of these now about making assumptions about Tendi because she's a Ryan.
Yeah, and which again has a HR quality about like your profiling. There's some like racist type reaction to going, you're saying that because I'm an Orion, and then they lean into that when we learned that Tendi's nickname or other name was Mistress of the Winter Constellation. And she did use her
really cool name.
Yeah, it's like somebody thought hard about that. And I mean, kicking her cousin in the face when she used her command voice, he's kissing her feet. So yeah, she can play hardball. It's not her personality to do so. So like she doesn't like doing it. It'd be like you playing drill sergeant. I know you can do it, but it would be weird.
It would not be a natural state. Let's just put it that way.
You'd be acting. Yes. And not your usual. That said, we have, basic contract negotiations. No, it's not even that. She orders her cousin to fix the loot so that they could go sell it, which again is a lie. And he does art forgeries. So I'm like, he's not like as a public policy matter, you don't reward that conduct by them being able to seek judicial relief.
Mhm.
You don't get to do that. Period. End of story. That's not how it works. Uh, but it turns into a giant fight, and there would be fallout from that if you cause things to blow up. And even though the
That was
Orion,
kind of their fault, the Orions.
they're the aggressor, so I
Yeah.
don't think Tendi and Mariner have any liability for that, because they were fighting for their lives to escape, and they were trying to literally escape. So it's not like they were doing the we can stand
Ooh.
our ground and fight all of them.
So we could, though, we could have a longer discussion about that if you wanted to, because it is a little bit interesting, just the way that self-defense works, and it varies from state to state, but the general sort of framework is actually kind of like a hot potato. Sort of the right to defend yourself can switch back and forth between two people, so that at any point of time during an encounter, a back and forth between two individuals, whoever is in the legitimate position of defense can switch. So, for example, in at least some states, committing a crime in front of a person or on a person that would be the ordinary sort of crime that might cause someone to react to that in using force, can give that person who is witnessing or a victim of that act the right to legitimate self-defense. But then, if you cease the action, if you try to defuse or disarm, the original sort of instigator tries to desist or disarm or defuse, and the other person persists in pursuing them or trying to attack them, the hot potato is switched. And now the person who was originally maybe in the wrong now has the right to self-defense. So we could actually go through this at some point, sort of frame by frame, to see. Yeah, and it would actually be a fun issue spotter in the sense of you can kind of try to trace, well, okay, in this moment, who has tried to defuse? Okay, so they are trying to retreat. They may arguably have committed the first act by trespassing under false pretenses. I don't know. I'm just, but then, no matter what that initial act is, if you do try to retreat, if you do try to defuse, that potato can switch hands.
Yeah, well, they weren't armed, so it's with the issue of
Oh
self-defense.
yeah, I guess that's true.
So with the issue of self-defense, you don't just get to shoot a trespasser, and you also have to deal with the fact that the reason this is a hot potato now is stand your ground's been perverted into something that it wasn't intended to be in the first place. California is a stand your ground state since our founding. And the original way that the rule is supposed to work is you don't have a duty to retreat if somebody's trying to kill you. That's the way it's supposed to be. With the way it's been perverted, with states that have decided to adopt it themselves right now, it turns into a license to go murder people. With the John Oliver did a wonderful piece about it. That was kind of frustrating if you have a legal education and you know how the rule is supposed to work. But the fact that people are going, there's somebody by my neighbor's house. I am afraid of that person, so I will now leave my house and kill them. That's murder. And there are people dressing it up as self-defense, saying, well, I feared for my life. It's like, well, you left your house to go kill somebody. That doesn't make you a hero who should be doing interviews. And that's the problem that we have with self-defense rules right now, because they're being applied in a way that they weren't intended to be. It's a shield. It's not supposed to be a sword. That said, let's talk about our characters here. And I don't have a photographic memory of who did what when.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a serious question as to who is in the right between our favorite Starfleet officers and Orion pirates, and specifically Orion pirates, not just Orions, to attendees, as Tendi would probably want me to emphasize. But so I think you're right. I don't think they brought any weapons or phasers. I do think they threw some punches. But so it is an interesting piece of the law of self-defense, though, that it can swap. So it's just interesting that, while the Orions may have clearly been in the wrong at the outset to try to accost Beckett and Tendi after discovering that one of them was human, which, more racism. But so after discovering that Beckett was in fact a human in green face, attempting to assault them, so that would be clearly they're the instigator, they're the wrongdoer. It is interesting, though, that even though someone starts out as the instigator or the wrongdoer, that it can shift. And in this case, however, going through this frame by frame, Tendi and Beckett are generally the ones that are attempting to retreat and defuse. So I don't think that the hot potato actually switches hands at any point during this encounter.
It's agreed. Which then brings us to the issue that our original security officer came back from the dead. And
wait, I have one more thing.
Oh, go for it.
Just one more thing on before we move past the girls' trip, which is it against the Uniform Code of Military Justice for Tendi and Beckett to gamble? And yeah, this again, Article 134 has some pretty funny, somewhat outdated provisions in it, or at least to us, I think would seem a little outdated. And one of them is a prohibition against gambling. However, Josh, is either Beckett or Tendi superior or inferior to each other?
No, they're both ensigns. Mariner might have seniority.
And is ensign is a commissioned officer, right?
Yeah, so they're both the first rank, officer rank. So it's not like,
for both of those reasons, they're fine. So in this kind of weird archaic part of Article 135, superior officers cannot gamble with inferior officers. So you could have, and this actually is something that happened right with the poker games that were happening on the Enterprise. The officers all have to be in the same rank if they're playing together, or they all have to be commissioned officers. So for some reason, there's a prohibition against gambling between superior and inferior non-commissioned or petty officers. Doesn't apply to commissioned officers, just if anyone's curious.
That was quietly addressed in the HBO series Band of Brothers, which was based upon, the 82nd Airborne missions. And with one of the officers playing cards with the enlisted men. And his CEO told him, never do anything to take from these men. Mm-hmm. And which is right. And like afterwards, like, oh, oops. Because it's like you could be sending them to go die. So you don't need that on top of what the mission is.
And interestingly, that has been codified in the UCMJ.
Yeah, so people thought about it because I don't think most laws are not proactively made. They're somebody's epitaph. And when somebody went like, oh, we can't do that because this is what it represents. Or bad things, mistakes were made. And
Thanks for letting me work that in, Josh.
You're welcome. So let's talk about Shax and who came back from the dead. And Rutherford's a little freaked out because that dude died saving Rutherford. Like so he's naturally curious. And we find out that people coming back from the dead is not uncommon for the bridge crew. And that there's this unwritten rule of not to ask about it. And somebody who does gets sent to his manager to be transferred.
Yeah.
So
that was like shockingly serious. I was expecting like just don't ever ask him that. You should be ashamed of yourself. Go to the other side of the room. Yeah, but not go get a new position.
And everyone in the compartment looking around shocked with like, he did what? And this lieutenant asking, like, no, seriously, he was dead. Like, he came back.
Yeah.
So, a lot to address with the legal analysis here. So, on one level, there was the reaction that Shax was teary-eyed. He's having flashbacks. So, is it negligent infliction of emotional distress for asking someone how they came back to life? And the rule with that is, this is if you're a direct victim theory, that the plaintiff must demonstrate that the defendant acted negligently, that the plaintiff suffered emotional distress, and the defendant's negligence caused the plaintiff emotional distress. So I've said, Nari, how did you come back from the dead? And you get all teary-eyed and upset because you had to face 3 faceless versions of your father, one of whom ate your heart. Yeah, it's like
that was wild, man.
it was brilliant, so brilliant. But is it, to ask someone how?
Josh, I have a hard time imagining that simply asking it would qualify.
I agree with that because it's like, dude, we were at a funeral. Like,
Yeah.
how did this happen? I think that's a pretty normal reaction. On the flip side, if it's happening enough that people are traumatized by it, and you basically can transfer someone for asking the question, puts it into the category of it's an HR violation. It'd be like asking, like, hey, are you pregnant? Like that, you don't get to do that and keep your job. Like, you're done if you do something like that.
But I do think it is a problem. This is an unwritten rule that carries such serious consequences. This needs to be in their handbook. If you can get transferred or reassigned for having done it.
Yeah, it can't be. You can't have unwritten rules that have consequences, because at that point it's like rules need to be predictable. Like, that's the entire concept of fundamental fairness. That we don't have a star chamber. We'll just round people up and prosecute them for, and have legal consequences for things that aren't predictable.
And when we do have systems like that, Josh, it just happens that the people that we don't like end up being the ones that are always in the wrong, and the people that we like are always the ones that are in the right, and the people that we like are often like us. And anyway,
it's indiscriminate treatment at that point in time. So ways that this could be protected information would be, there's a variety of kind of, they're in the defamation family, even though it's not defamation. It could be like false light or disclosure of something that's normally kept private. And that could fall under the category of like, hey, you don't get to ask those questions because like that's private. Or
so interestingly, if Shax had been asked that by a superior, maybe that would change it. It's the fact that an inferior is asking him, though, right? So I don't see how there could, because it'd be interesting if there were maybe the perception that he were being required to disclose that, right? I could actually understand that might be an interesting argument, but there can't possibly be that perception here. This is an inferior officer, right?
It's an inferior officer, so like that doesn't work. On the flip side, because then it turns into like negligent infliction of emotional distress, because he's clearly traumatized by the experience. Which then brings us to the security issue, that if a dead person comes back, and we'll jump more into this, but you need to verify, like, how did this happen? Like
when Rutherford runs through all of the possibilities of how this could have happened, a lot of them were not great and would pose an ongoing security threat.
Yeah, because you need to know what happened. And it would make sense for managers to know that, command officers, and then they just keep that private, which is the way that it's supposed to work at work. Like if somebody has requires a special accommodation. It's not going to be public information. Like that makes sense. To but this is people don't normally come back from the dead. When that happens, it's religions are formed.
Yes.
Uh, but the fact it's happening here raises the issue that is resurrection protected under the right of privacy and being able to go like, hey, I don't want to talk about that. So in California, it's an inalienable right that we have the right to privacy in this state. So that actually gives it teeth. You know, there are other state laws that give privacy matters protection, and federal laws. Even though there's no openly federal right to privacy, we get into penumbras and let's just not talk like Griswold and everything else with how we get there. But it's confusing.
Although those would be protections against the government. We'd have to look for statutory sources if we're going to be applying this against your employer, although Starfleet is kind of the government.
Yeah, and for like HIPAA, that would require a healthcare provider would be at play. And that's not what we have here with like private individuals asking, hey, how'd you come back from the dead?
Yeah.
And like, that's not, and you know what? That's kind of a normal reaction to go like, you were dead.
Yeah. Well,
you saved us.
I guess, I mean, so the other thing, you could also, maybe people ought to know that coming back from the dead is a traumatic experience. So you could argue, this is a little different. But it feels to me like somebody came back from a vacation and you get reassigned for asking them where did you go on vacation? When did you get back? Like, it's just something that's obvious to everybody who's there. It's apparent, and you ask a, pretty innocuous question. Like an infliction of emotional distress, I'm not as aware or knowledgeable about negligent infliction of emotional distress. At least for intentional, though, you kind of have to know that, like, or should know that this would hurt somebody. And asking them, especially because some of the various methods from which Starfleet officers have come back are not traumatic. So, like, you came from a parallel universe is not necessarily a traumatic event that would bring you to tears to retell it, or you were a transporter duplicate, as we had in the previous episode. I think it was the previous episode. Those are not the kind of thing that would cause that people should or would know would cause emotional distress. So it's tough, Josh. I'm having a tough time finding why this would be a problem.
Yeah, there would. It's not the normal thing. Rutherford going through all the different options. There was a lot of callbacks to different parts of Trek with that. The reanimated by the Borg, that's how William Shatner brought back Kirk in one of the books that he wrote with, I didn't like killing off my character, so I will bring him back. Good for you.
Then Trapped in the Nexus, also Shatner. So
again, twice. We have Genesis.
Vulcan's spiritual ritual.
Yeah, we have the Katra. They do talk about getting Genesis devised. So yeah, I mean, wonderful callbacks to different ways that people can get resurrected. But that raises the issue: what happens when the dead come back to life? Because the law is not designed for that.
What?
I know.
We don't have pages of code about what to do when an individual returns from the dead?
No, we don't, because it's not something we plan for, because it doesn't happen in this establishment.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. We are not prepared for the zombie apocalypse.
No, well, separate discussion. Let's say that that could be a Halloween episode. So we'll save that for later. But so the law is just not designed for resurrection, because when somebody dies, that ends marriage. Like, you're done. It arguably ends citizenship as well, because you're dead. You're not alive anymore. It also means that property is distributed. We have rules about burying people and disposing bodies as quickly as possible for public health requirements. And we have lots of rules with dead bodies because we want them treated well and disposed of as quickly as possible. We also have a legal mechanism if somebody disappears for amount of time, it could be 7 years, they can be declared dead. So there was a case from 1900 where a wife brought a lawsuit against an insurance company for payment of her husband's $2,000 life insurance policy 9 years after he disappeared. So they settle with her for $666, the mark of the beast, which is just a weird number that they arrived at, but it's 1900. It's McKinley first term. That's a lot of money back then. And the remainder was to be held in trust in the event the husband was alive. After 12 days after they enter the agreement, the long lost husband is found alive. The court found that the money that was paid to the wife as the basis of the settlement uh, ended that lawsuit. So they weren't getting it back because the husband was alive. You cannot contract to end a lawsuit and then plan to pay out zero.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be one thing if he showed up alive. And that means like, hey, the life insurance money is not going to get paid out at all because turns out the dude's alive.
Mm-hmm.
You get marriage abandonment and a bunch of other things that you could go after at that point in time. Probably fraud, unless he was shipwrecked someplace. But
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that's a different situation. But that's the closest I could find to someone dead or presumed dead
Mm-hmm.
coming back, because we don't have a Lazarus clause of somebody who's dead coming out of the ground and then is ready to partay once again.
Mm-hmm.
Like that just doesn't happen. So, but that means they have to give him back his stuff, or like, it's like security clearances, verify everything all over again. And it's just, it's wild.
I'm just going to assume that they are following a similar procedure to two Boimlers. We have a record of Shax. We have a record that he died. We have a new Shax. We're just going to roll with it and put all of his stuff into the computer. Now we have two.
Yeah. And, there was the Voyager where, the ship was connected to a copy of itself. And with the Vidians who, and they self-destruct one of the ships, but Kim is killed, and the surviving Harry Kim goes to the surviving ship. So that way they balance it out. Along with was it Naomi Wildman, who had just been born and was a stillborn on one version. So again, wild and crazy stuff in Star Trek, where weird is part of the game. So, any other thoughts on Resurrection that you want to jump into?
No, other than I like your idea for a Halloween episode.
Oh, we will. So with that, lots of fun stuff. And this was also very focused legal issues.
Mm-hmm.
So that was nice that it's not a giant maze or just one. So nice and tight. So yes, good stuff. So with that, closing comments?
Just that I'm looking forward to the next one and to see who else they can bring in as a voice actor, because it was a treat to have Tom Paris there.
Oh, that, and we didn't talk about the assault. So
Tom Paris punching out Boimler.
Yeah, going Kazon and then beating the snot out of him.
The Delta Quadrant.
Not many people can say that. Yeah,
no.
That was so well done. But yeah, just because he looked like a Kazon, what was the chance of that? I mean, you could argue mistake of fact, but again, it goes to the evolved 24th century of like, I'm gonna have to go buy that dude a drink and really make up for that.
Oh yeah, he's gonna sign the plate. But yeah, I actually I think think it's not just that he looked like a Kazon, but also that he crashed through the ceiling. Yeah, I can see you reacting with "I must defend my ship."
Yeah, and
I'm gonna be honest, if somebody crashed through my ceiling right now, I would probably punch them out too, whether or not they look like a Kazon.
well, that would be very abnormal.
Yeah.
On board a starship, though, people are like crawling around Jeffrey's tubes all the time fixing things. So, um, yeah. So with that, everyone, we'll be back next week. So stay safe, stay healthy, and above all else, stay geeky.